name's Ken Henderson. I'm the chair of the Okay, I just recognized that I'm being recorded. I'm the chair of the Friends of Northern Lake Champlain, and our organization is going to serve on one of the seats on this council. And I'll hand this off to my longtime partner's spouse, Sarah, who is muted. You're muted, Sarah.
I always mute because I don't have much bandwidth. I'm Sarah Downs, and I just retired after teaching agriculture and forestry for 45 years. I'm chair of the Enosburg Conservation Commission, and I'm also on Cold Holiday Canada. And who's next on mine? Abraham.
Hi everyone, I'm Abraham Ames. I work for the Orleans County Conservation District. I am one of 2 employees there. I manage the Memphremagog Regional Conservation Partnership Plan. So I work in Orleans County, but I do not manage projects in the Missisquoi Bay or watershed area. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you. Next down from me is Dean. I'm gonna go ahead with the introduction there, Dean. Thanks.
Sure, Abe. Thank you. Dean Pierce, and I am a senior planner at the Northwest Regional Planning Commission, and we'll be seeing a lot of you folks in coming years. How about Emily?
I'm Emily Charrington. I'm the stormwater coordinator for the town of St. Albans and acting as an alternate here for municipalities. Well, potentially.
Emily, you want to pick the next person?
Sorry, Luke.
Hi, everyone. I'm Luke Brichetti. I'm an assistant planner at RPC. I'm mostly just here to sort of keep abreast of the goings on of the council to see, how I could be of assistance in the future. So good to meet you all. And I'm excited to be here. And I almost just forgot to pick someone too. We're going to pass it to Lindsay.
Hi guys, I am Lindsay White, the Executive Director of the Missisquoi River Basin Association and also the Upper Missisquoi and Traverse Wild and Scenic Committee. I'm going to pass it off to Lauren.
Hi everyone, I'm Lauren Weston. I'm the Franklin County Natural Resources Conservation District Manager. And I'm coming off of a terrible migraine, so I might turn my video off at some point here. It's my first one, so goodness gracious, those are just murdersome. I will pass it to Barry.
I'm Barry Lamke. I'm with the Northwest Regional Planning Commission. And I will pass it off to T.
I think that was me. My name is Dea.
Yeah, sorry.
No problem. I am the Water Quality Program Coordinator at the NRPC, and I help Dean with many of the water quality and clean water service provider duties. And Peter, have you gone yet?
No, I have not. I'm Pete Benevento, and I'm with the Lake Carmi Campers Association and the Franklin Watershed Committee. And I think that's everybody.
I think Tom, have you gone, and Beth?
I haven't come up yet. Okay,
Oh.
Go ahead.
I'm Tom Brizzleton with the Friends of Northern Lake Champlain.
And I'm Beth Torpy, Northeastern Vermont Development Association.
And I'm Jake Kuchar from Westfield, serve as chairman of our select board in this town, and also a dairy and maple farmer on the Upper Missisquoi. And I'm an alternate, I believe, for this.
Great. I think that's everybody. Is that everybody now? Wonderful.
It's nice to meet those of you that I haven't met before, and it's nice to see some familiar faces too. So both Jake and Emily noted the alternate situation. Next up on our agenda, the rule that governs how this whole system works requires the council, the Basin Water Quality Council, to actually approve the alternates. And Dean is about to share something that will help us through this agenda item.
I am, and I'm hoping that people can see a table on their screens now.
Yes.
Okay, and this is something that is on the Basin Water Quality Council web page, which is part of the Northwest Regional Planning Commission's website. So I just wanted to also mention that you will find information related to your work posted there. The representatives are shown, as are the alternates. The alternates for this basin would include Abraham Ames and Tom Briselden and Ellen Fox, who I don't believe is part of this session right now, Emily Charrington, and Jake. And that is the complete list of alternates that we have right now for this basin. So if it's acceptable to the group, then I think some kind of indication that those alternates are seated would be good.
I think if we can keep it formal for this item, and maybe somebody who is a member of the Water Quality Council could make a motion to appoint the alternates.
This is Kent, and I so move.
I second it. This is Sarah.
Thank you, Kent and Sarah. Is there any discussion about this motion? All right, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, please say nay. And any abstentions? Wonderful. Congratulations to our alternates. You are now official. There's no turning back. Great. So I'm thinking now we probably should have switched this agenda item a little bit, where we talk about the expectations of the meeting and the ground rules prior to seating the alternates. That would have been helpful, but this is fine. So because we haven't done the elections of chair and vice chair yet for this meeting, Dean and I will share facilitation purposes, and we're hoping at the next meeting that we'll do elections, and then the chair and vice chair can take it from there. For the meeting today, what we really hope to accomplish is a little bit of time to get to know each other, and also some making sure we all have a common understanding of the background that led us to this place today, and do a couple of the key actions that we need to do, such as impaneling the council, which we've done, approving the alternates, which we just did. And we're really hoping that this first meeting will set the stage for a really cooperative process as we move forward with the Basin Water Quality Council. We are hoping to keep the meetings very informal. So if you have a question, raise your hand, jump in. No need to follow a lot of ceremony. And we can just work together in a nice, easy, and collaborative way. Is there anything you want to add to that, Dean?
No, I think that's good.
I'll just note that Alaire looks like that they popped on, so maybe we can have a quick introduction from them.
Oh, yes. Great. Alaire, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. I'm sorry I'm late, everybody. I'm Alaire Diamond from Vermont Land Trust, and I'm an ecologist there, and excited to be in this group.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Welcome. Are there any expectations or goals for this meeting that people had that they wanted to share that I didn't mention or that aren't on the agenda? All right. So now we're going to enter into the next phase of our meeting, which is really making sure everybody has the same base information and knowledge about the Clean Water Service Provider, Basin Water Quality Councils, and our work. for some of you, some parts of this will be review, and for others it won't. And so we appreciate your patience as we go through this. Dean is going to do the Act 76 and Clean Water Service Provider Rule and overview and the context for impaneling the Basin Water Quality Council. And then I'll do a brief open meeting law and public records review before we take a break. So Dean, I'm handing it over to you.
Thank you, Catherine. And I'm hoping that everybody at this point can see the first slide.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Whoops. As mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the framework that's been provided by Act 76 and the Clean Water Service Provider Rule. It will be review. It was suggested that it would be a good way to present this as the rules of the road, because both the Act and the formal rules do that. So I'm going to talk first about Act 76, which is also called the Clean Water Service Delivery Act, which I know is a mouthful, but it's got some very important elements that affect what we're doing. And the first is that it provides a long-term funding source to do the work that we're about to do. And that funding source will go to paying for the projects that will help us meet the phosphorus reduction goals. We are working on a particular aspect of the pollution problem, and that's the phosphorus that is produced by those who are not regulated. So the Clean Water Fund that I'm referring to is the portion of the dollars from the state that are going to be used to do projects that are not regulated. So if you're building a shopping center, you have to get a stormwater permit, and that's a regulated activity. The work of this group is focused on the non-regulated activities. Another very important thing that Act 76 did is that it created this decentralized network of clean water service providers, of which the Northwest Regional Planning Commission is one. And the Northwest Regional Planning Commission happens to be the clean water service provider for a couple of basins, the Missisquoi Basin and the Lamoille Basin. And in addition to these service providers, the public bodies that are the councils that you are all part of. And as mentioned, the Act develops the targets that we are to meet, and it sets up grant programs. But funding, addressing that funding at non-regulatory activities and creating this decentralized regional network of clean water basin service providers and councils are the main elements of Act 76. The rule that helps implement the Act did several things, but including identifying the clean water service provider for each basin. That's how the Northwest Regional Planning Commission got this task. It includes a lot of definitions, and it's got specific sections for the clean water service providers and how they are supposed to act and do their job, as well as for the Basin Water Quality Councils. It also mentions the need to observe conflict of interest procedures. It also identifies that the councils are going to have their progress reviewed. The clean water service providers are going to have their progress reviewed. The clean water service providers will have 5-year agreements, and after the end of those 5 years, or at the end of those 5 years, our progress will be measured to determine whether or not we will continue in that role. So what is the role of the clean water service providers? It's to support you, the councils. It's to identify the projects, these non-regulatory projects that will meet the phosphorus reduction targets. Our role also includes establishing, or in many cases, maintaining partnerships that we have with existing organizations that many of you are part of. We will subcontract work. That is, we'll pass the money through to those organizations to do projects. Something else that the clean water service providers need to do is to verify that the projects that are paid for and built do what they are supposed to do, were designed to do, and that they're maintained. So we have a verification and inspection responsibility. We also make sure that projects are consistent with the tactical basin plans. The tactical basin plans exist for each of the basins in Vermont. And then we also look at ways that the other potential benefits of projects, so-called co-benefits, could play a role in the selection of projects. As I mentioned, we have 5-year agreements. The funding that is directed to the councils reflects the size of the pollution problem, for lack of a better term. So in basins that have larger pollution problems or larger phosphorus reduction targets, there is greater funding. And the Missisquoi Basin is, in fact, the basin with the largest targets, and so the funding level is the highest. We are also, as the council, providing guidance to the organizations that we will work with to do the projects so that they can efficiently apply for the funding and get the projects done. So we will be releasing guidance to those organizations in the next few months. We'll have a procurement policy in place that also guides, because there's going to, in total, there's going to be a lot of work done. There's going to be a fair amount of money, a large amount of money flowing, and that money will need to be spent in an effective and efficient way. And one way to ensure that is through a procurement policy to make sure that the selection processes are fair and equitable. One way of speeding the process along is to pre-qualify the subgrantee. So we will use a process to get people's credentials recognized, essentially, so that that process can happen more quickly as projects are identified. We also have to observe different management requirements that the Department of Environmental Conservation establishes. And last but not least, we must engage the public, and we must follow the open meetings law and the public records law as a public body. The councils, to move along, provide the local knowledge that's needed to help identify projects that will help us meet these targets. You as a body will identify policies that will guide the QISP and guide us. And you will make the decisions about what are the most significant water quality problems in the basin. So you will be critical in determining what the most significant problems are and get the funding directed to those problems. It will have to be in a manner that is consistent with the basin plan, and the basin plans are an activity that the rules say that the councils have a specific part in. So in the future, the councils didn't exist, so they were not recognized participants in the basin planning process, but going forward, the councils will have a very specific defined role in that process. Just to go a little bit further, there's one council for each basin, and as we have figured out so far already, there are defined seats: resource conservation districts, regional planning commissions, watershed protection organizations, land protection organizations, and municipalities. And the rule spells out these duties. And like I said, they include identifying policy and making decisions about those most significant problems and prioritizing the projects that will address them. It's really, those are the keystone elements of this. Things that the rule also says is that you will meet at least 4 times a year. In order to meet, you must have a quorum, and if you have a vote, then a majority of that binds the council and makes the decision. You've already identified the alternates. The rule says that alternates can be recognized and designated. So thank you very much for doing that. And then the rule also talks about conflict of interest. And what the rule says is that a member of the council must recuse themselves if they are proposing a project, but they may answer questions about the project that they're proposing. So there's this somewhat of a balancing act because you do have the local knowledge, and that will mean that sometimes the projects that are being considered are projects that you've been involved in. You as a representative won't vote on that, but you will be able to answer questions. Just wrapping up here, other participants in this process include the Department of Environmental Conservation, which sets the targets, gives guidance, disperses the funds, and monitors progress. Another participant in this process as a result of the law is something called the Clean Water Board, which helps set priority for funding at a very high level. And then, of course, the partners, the organizations on the ground that are going to do the projects and get the work done. Just take a breather here, maybe give you a second to soak in this graphic, which basically describes or shows in graphical form some of the stuff that I've been talking about. And that is that, we start with the targets for phosphorus reduction that were created in the TMDL, which is the study that identified how bad the pollution problem is in the Lake Champlain Basin. The targets get refined and set. The targets get assigned to the districts, to the clean water service providers. The funding gets distributed based on that. We do projects, you do projects, and then DEC assesses our progress. I wanted to just give people some idea of what the funding source is. It's a 6% rooms and meals tax, and there's also a surcharge on the property transfer tax. And then the unclaimed bottle receipts go towards this work. $7 million is the level of funding for the entire fund this coming year. And that gets distributed in the way that I'm going to show you in just a moment. I wanted to give people an idea that the projects that can be funded using this money are very diverse. They include things like a stormwater pond on some developed property. It can involve roadside ditches, restoring floodplains, establishing buffers along streams, buffers on farmland, restoring wetlands, conserving forest land. Those are all activities that could be done that if they have a phosphorus reduction, significant phosphorus reduction would likely be considered key projects to help meet the goals. And the funding can also be used to do the very early work that helps us figure out whether or not something is a viable project. So doing an assessment of a particular area and what the stormwater problems or water quality problems are would be an eligible activity. So things like stormwater master plans, geomorphic assessments, watershed action plans, some portion of the funding that we receive can go to those activities. So I'd like to spend a minute to talk about the pollution targets because from my perspective, it's really important to know how challenging the problem that we're working on may be. This is a graphic that shows basically a timeline along the bottom, and the y-axis is kilograms of phosphorus, but essentially you see a curve that is indicating essentially how much phosphorus was flowing into Lake Champlain from the basin in 2016. And over on the right-hand side is where we are supposed to be in 2036. So as you can see, it's a pretty substantial reduction in phosphorus that we need to achieve. And this is for our basin, the Missisquoi. It doesn't look quite as steep in other basins, but the size of the problem to be tackled is great here. This is another graphic that shows some of the information in a different way. Again, we have the initial loading, where we are to be by 2036. Essentially 2/3 of what we produce needs to be cut away. There are the regulatory regulatory activities that are going to reduce much of that, but the QUISP target, which is essentially the portion of the reduction that we need to address, is still pretty substantial. Now, a lot of the information that I'm showing you, it's essentially from models, mathematical models that are trying to break out the problem and say which portion comes from farm activities, which comes from developed activities. What you can see from this pie chart, which is a little bit clearer than the bar chart, is that the sources of phosphorus pollution, excess phosphorus, come from all sectors. And the important thing to keep in mind is that while we understand where they're coming from, where you assign the funding, it could reflect the sources, or it may be weighted in one area more than another. We are not held to reducing the phosphorus in each of the sectors. So we may end up finding that it's more cost efficient to focus projects in a particular sector, say streams, than it is in developed areas, because the cost per phosphorus reduced is less. Just to wrap up here, I talked about the $7 million figure statewide for the coming year. For the Missisquoi Basin, it's essentially a total amount of close to $2 million. There's a maximum on administration of 15% that applies, so there is a limit on administrative costs. What happened is that the state determined what the amount of funding that was reasonable or could be accomplished this year was. That's the $7 million. The $7 million was divided across basins based on how bad the problem was. And then using some formulas, knowing how much money we have and what the average costs of projects are, they came up with first year reduction targets. So taking the amount of money available, looking at what the average costs of projects to solve those problems are, how much phosphorus could we actually reduce with that amount of money? And our target is a total of 145 kilograms. Now, just to give people some idea of what that means, a single gravel wetland project might reduce phosphorus by about 7 kilograms a year. So that would mean several gravel wetland projects would be necessary. A 3-acre floodplain restoration might reduce 10 kilograms a year. So we would need several projects if we're going to meet that annual goal. And then just wrapping up here, the first year targets that we have reflect the amount of money that's available. That's far less than taking the total target and dividing by the number of years that we have left. So that means that if we are going to reach the targets, there's going to need to be some kind of acceleration to catch up, because as you can see here, blue is the total amount that we would need to reduce. The gray is essentially what it would be if we were dividing it up evenly over time. And the orange, which you can just barely see, is what we will have in our first year. So I would be happy to answer any questions. It's throwing a lot at you. This is information that you will hear again and again and again in different ways, but I'd be happy to just stop there and answer questions before Catherine takes over for the next stage.
This is Jake. I do have a question, and maybe it's too early in the process to ask this question, but I noticed that streams contribute 33% or some number. I don't know if I remembered it correctly here from your pie graph. And I'm wondering what, or is it too early to tell, what would be the plan of action to work with the streams? I understand how, how the process works for reducing farm runoff and urban runoff and all that. But when you get into streams, pretty difficult. So I'm just kind of curious if anybody has any thoughts on that, or again, if it's too early to ask this question in the process, just tell me and I'll wait on it.
Yeah, I don't know that it's too early. Although I'm not necessarily the best person to answer that question. And I'm thinking that perhaps, Lindsay, your organization does a lot of stream related work. I could maybe just get the ball rolling and say that it could be things like allowing restoring access to the floodplain. So there are places where naturally there would be a floodplain, but something has essentially created barriers between the stream and what was the floodplain, so that because the water can't spread out and slow down and settle, by having that barrier, the water speeds up and its energy intensifies and it causes more erosion and carries more sediment. So allowing that stream to go back to its original floodplain could be an eligible type project. That's one example. I don't know, Lindsay, do you want to throw out any other types?
Dean, I think that's going to be kind of the biggest bang for the buck, is reconnecting our floodplains, restoring wetlands, but of course tree plantings, stream bank stabilizations using bioengineering methods. But I think restoration of floodplains is going to be the target.
Thank you.
Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I have some ideas too.
Well, it'll be great to hear them.
Yep.
If there are no other questions, then maybe we can turn things. Oh,
I got two questions and maybe a comment. I'd like to know, there's $7 million to be distributed this year. How variable is that amount of money? Are we riding a crest of funding due to ARPA funds addressing other areas? Or can we expect to be dealing with this amount of money every year, or will it go back to 5 million in 3 years?
well, I can take a stab. This is not ARPA money. Now, there may be there is a lot of ARPA money that's flowing to the state that is being used on other things, presumably, one-time things, so that we are not causing problems for ourselves. But the way I look at it, Kent, is that, as I showed in the graph, even at $7 million, we're not keeping pace with what we're supposed to reduce in terms of pollution. So if it's any less, there's no hope of meeting targets. So the funding will have to be at levels like this or higher, because otherwise it becomes infeasible. The councils would turn to the state and say, this isn't, you can't set these goals and not have the adequate amount of funding to reach those goals. And Catherine,
I feel
anything?
I think you said that well. Just the state is under an obligation to meet these phosphorus targets. So they have to be met and the funds have to be found. That being said, appropriations is a yearly business.
Yeah, and I just think that this basin has been set a really, really high goal. And if there's a possibility of these funds not being available every year, this council's going to really have its hands full. The other thing that I was wondering about was the source of the pie graphs that you showed regarding the 4 different areas that are on the goals. And like the area in particular that caught my eye was the farmland, because it's my understanding that QISP money can only go to the non-certified small farms, which is it is not I'd like to know where those numbers came from. and if that is a realistic number or not.
Yeah, so I can quickly address that. There's a table that I'm happy to send you that came from DEC that has these numbers in them. So that's the short answer. So I can send you the table. Okay. It's, like I said, based on modeling and some kind of thought experiments. But you were right. The QUISPs and the councils are going to be looking at only about 10% of the agricultural land related phosphorus generation. The rest is the Department or Agency of Agriculture. So you're right, it would be things that are happening on the non-regulated farms, those really small below the required agricultural practices limit. But it could also, and I'm understanding, would also include practices that are not agronomic. So if there was a farmer who, say, was willing to put in even larger buffers that are not, it could be that it's not related to an agrological or agronomic practice. So that's why the number is 10% rather than 90%. But it's, was 10% the right number? It might not be. It might be that 5% was the right number, but for now, 10% of the total problem that's phosphorus generated by ags is what was assumed and goes into the formula.
Okay, thanks.
Barry?
Do we know if other clean water service providers are subject to this steep acceleration curve, or is that particular to this basin?
We know the numbers statewide, and I have charts that can show you. I had some, if there's time later or interest later or interest now, I can show what the situation is for the state as a whole. But yes, we know the numbers for everyone, and I just thought it would be more complicated to show you all of those numbers, but I'm happy to share them. We do know, but the Missisquoi target is the greatest target. If there's no one else with a question that has to be addressed at this time, then Catherine, shall we turn things over to you?
Thanks, Dean. So as the Clean Water Service Provider and the Basin Water Quality Councils are established as a function of government, they fall under Vermont's open meeting law and public records law. And so we thought it would be helpful for some of you, again, this will be a total review, and for others, this might be new. We thought it would be helpful to do a very quick overview of the open meeting and public records laws so that you can understand the framework under which you're operating under Vermont's open government. So I will share my screen. All right, so Vermont's open meeting law and public records law, I'm sure you've heard about these in the past, even if you've not operated under them, because they end up being the frequent source of news stories when folks are doing public records requests. In a nutshell, these two laws together combine to ensure that Vermont's local, state, regional governments are open to the public in a way that builds and retains the public trust. These aren't laws to be feared. They're not requirements to be feared. They're actually, in my opinion, something that should be celebrated as part of what makes Vermont government accessible to its citizens and really helps to maintain less of a barrier between government and the private citizens. So Vermont's open meeting law, in a nutshell, requires that all meetings of public bodies are open to the public. And this contains, within it contains several subcategories to that, requiring advance notice of public meetings, requiring that all business of the public body is done in an open meeting, allowing the public to attend and participate in meetings, and taking minutes or a record of the meeting and making that record available to the public. sorry, the fundamental foundation of the law defines a public body and a meeting. And those are the two things that are really the most important pieces to determine whether the open meeting law applies to what you're doing. So a public body, as defined in the law, is any board, council, or commission of the state or any of its political subdivisions. So the way the Basin Water Quality Councils fit under this is that the state has delegated one of its functions, which is implementing the Lake Champlain Total Maximum Daily Load Plan for phosphorus reduction to these QUISPs and Basin Water Quality Councils. So that function's been transferred to us, and therefore the Basin Water Quality Councils are a public body. Any questions about what a public body is? Okay, what is a meeting? Sorry, I gotta move my cat off my lap so I can stop coughing. So a public meeting is when a quorum is gathered. So a quorum is a majority of the members of a public body. So whenever a quorum is gathered to discuss business or take action, then you have what's called a meeting under the open meeting law. The way it's important to note that discussing business or taking action is one of the important definitions. So if you have a majority of a select board members who show up at the town potluck dinner, then it's not a meeting as long as they're not talking about business. But whenever you gather to do business or take action, then it is a meeting. Email communications and conversations are considered meetings. So if you have a majority of members of a public body conversing about business over email, that constitutes a meeting and therefore would be in violation of open meeting law because it's not open to the public. So email communications are something that should be avoided unless you're establishing agendas or sharing information about a meeting. Also, excuse me just a minute, I'm really sorry, hang on a second. Sorry, nothing like getting a coughing fit while you're trying to do a presentation, sorry about that. So also what could be considered a meeting is what's called serial communications or daisy chain communication. So if I, as the chair of a body, contact Dean and say, well, what do you think about this? I think we should vote yes. And then I contact Kent and ask him the same question. And then I contact Lindsay and then I contact Barry. That could be considered a meeting and you can't do that. That would be a violation of the open meeting law. The other thing to be careful of too, I'm not sure how much this would apply to Basin Water Quality Councils, but doing online editing or participating in social media could also be considered a meeting. This is a brave new world here, but say you have a town Facebook page and an issue gets posted on it and a majority of the select board or planning commission members offer a comment or their opinion about this issue, that in some ways could be considered a meeting. So we have a brave new world with electronic communications and social media that defines it really expands the definition of what a meeting is. So key elements to the open meeting law. The first is that you must have notice, public notice of all meetings. So when you have a regular day and time set, the agenda is posted 48 hours in advance. If you have to have a special meeting, it's posted 24 hours in advance. The agenda has to be posted in several locations and online. It has to include enough details so that members of the public and the people on the public body can understand the topics of the meeting. Adjustments to the agenda is always the first item. After that point, you can change the order around, but you can't add items to the agenda after you do the first adjustments. And then you must include where the meeting is being held, or if you're doing a fully virtual meeting, all the information to participate virtually. When a meeting is done, minutes have to be completed. Those minutes have to include everyone who is there, a record of motions, results of votes, and then those minutes have to be available and posted within 5 days. So all meetings of public bodies are open to the public. except for a very narrow exception, and that's called executive session. And that allows public bodies to meet in private under limited circumstances. You have to make a motion to enter executive session. You can invite legal counsel and staff, and you can't take any formal action. Any formal action still has to be taken in the public meeting itself. I was trying to think of any instances where I thought the Basin Water Quality Councils would need to meet in executive session, and so far I haven't really thought of any, but if any come up, we'll help guide you through it. So virtual meetings are allowed under the open meeting law, luckily, because that's what we're doing today, and plan to do for quite some time. So under normal circumstances, when you have a virtual meeting, you still have to have a physical location that's open to the public. But there was a bill passed this legislative session that for the next year allows people to have fully virtual meetings. When you have virtual meetings, fully virtual or partially, roll call votes have to be used if the votes and motions are not unanimous. And then finally, Vermont's public records requirements. This applies to all public agencies, including the Clean Water Service Provider and Basin Water Quality Council. So the public records basically requires that public records have to be open to inspection and copying, and that every member of the public has a right to inspect and copy those documents. Public agencies can charge a fee for that within limits set by both statute and the courts. So if there's ever an instance where you have to respond to a public records request, we can help guide you to that. Records have to be available for inspection during regular hours and retained according to a retention schedule. This applies to both paper and electronic records. So for example, emails are a public record, even though it's not a piece of paper, it's a record, and it has to be retained and made available to the public upon request. So what does this mean for you as Basin Water Quality Councils? So a few things. Under the open meeting law, NRPC serving as the clean water service provider, we will ensure that all of the meeting notices, agenda, and minutes comply with the law. So we'll make sure that all the basic requirements of the open meeting law are met. And then the chair, as the facilitator of the meetings, will be responsible for ensuring that the public has a right to comment and participate in the meetings. For the public records law, NRPC, we will retain all of the public records of the Basin Water Quality Council, and we'll respond to any public records requests. You as individual members or alternates of the Basin Water Quality Council have some responsibilities too. First is don't reply all to emails via email, especially if there's an issue that you want to discuss. Save those for the public meetings. Retain your emails or texts that are about Basin Water Quality Council business. If they include a staff member of the Clean Water Service Providers with, for example, Dean is on the email, he's going to have that and we'll have that as part of the public record. But if you, for any reason, are doing Basin Water Quality Council business via email that doesn't involve a member of the staff, you should save those emails. And then just overall respect the intent of the laws. The intent really is to ensure an open and visible process to everybody who wants to pay attention, and to really celebrate that as part of something that we do to make sure government is open to everybody. So I have, we'll post this presentation and make it available so that you can have links to these if you want more information. This was a really quick overview. There's lots of nuance and depth in these laws, but I figured you didn't need those. And if you really were interested, we can help you with more information. And so that is my overview. Are there any questions? All right, wonderful. And sorry again about having to coughing fit at the beginning. So if you ever have any questions about the open meeting law or public records, just let us know and we can help walk you through it. Next up on the agenda is a calendar overview, and I'm turning it back to Dean.
Thank you, Catherine. And Right now, everyone should be able to see a slide that has a calendar overview. Great, thank you. This shouldn't take very long. We just wanted to give you all some understanding of the work and the phases the work will go through. We, as the QUISP, have an agreement with the Department of Environmental Conservation that talks about these phases. Phase 1, how to create the website, establish contracting and grant systems, start work on project tracking, make sure our accounting system was lined up with what we will need to do. We also needed to have in place policies and guidelines and things like that. And much work on phase 1 has been done. Phase 2 is really getting a lot of attention now, and that's related to the work of getting the council started and getting the council members the training that you all feel you would like and need, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. There are also certain administrative requirements that the councils are supposed to meet, having to do with setting up rules and policies that we will take care of before long. There's also a phase 3 that is essentially kind of a buffer period between this initial getting things started phase and what will become more the norm, which is the brave new world of getting the projects identified, prioritized, and funded through the councils. To put a little bit finer point on it in terms of what the councils will be doing in the short term, electing a chair and vice chair is something that you will need to do. We have a staff thought that it might not be necessarily the best idea to say, okay, welcome, this is your first meeting, elect a chair, just because you might not feel ready to do that. So we see it as something that's in the short term, perhaps at your next meeting. Other short-term activities of the council will be to adopt bylaws and rules of procedure. And we as staff have put together a document that will give you something to chew on and start that discussion. The rules also say that the councils need to adopt jointly with the QUISP a public participation policy. So we have something along those lines that we would provide to the council to look at and comment on. We actually see it as something that would be done on an interim basis, just because to get one adopted and in place is one thing, but to have it say all that you want it to say and need it to say is another. And maybe that there would be a revision and a more permanent policy sometime in the future. And then the other short-term activity for the council members is the training that you all want and need. Medium term, giving direction to the QUISP on identifying and prioritizing projects. This is going to be a big part of your work. Establishing policies that are for the same thing and help us move towards meeting the targets. And then longer term, there will be the more formal scoring and ranking of projects. The very first work of essentially doing the math. There's a lot of doing the math in this work. It's identifying projects that have phosphorus benefits and saying, we would like to get credit for those. Well, in fact, some of the first projects that we will try to get credit for are projects that have already been done in recent years that haven't been essentially put into the ledger. So since it takes time to develop projects, we may spend a fair amount of time getting projects that have been done recently and that have phosphorus benefits recognized by DEC, and those will form the initial layer of projects for phosphorus benefits. And then that was that. We have indicated that we would give people time for a short break, perhaps 5 minutes, so that we can come back and have a bit of a discussion before we wrap up our work this morning. So how does that sound to folks? Okay, I see thumbs up. So I have 9:58. How would people like to come back at 10:05? Sounds good. All right. Well, we will see everyone in about 5 minutes or 6 minutes, 7 minutes. Thank you all. I should have been counting noses before, because I'm not sure if everyone who was here before is back. Okay, and Lauren is here. I think perhaps we can take it on faith that everyone is back.
So welcome back. Hope you had a good break. My voice is back, of course, now that I'm done my presentation. So next up on the agenda, we have the roundtable discussion. And Dean, are you taking this one?
Yes, I would be happy to facilitate this. And we'll just use the crutch of a slide. But we thought that it would be good to just give people an opportunity to share why they chose to serve on the council. And perhaps that will lead us to a larger discussion, but we thought it would be good. We do have a short biography or biographical notes that we prepared for each member, and those have been shared. There was some thought given to putting those on the website, but for now, we're just gonna let you have those yourselves, and so you can understand who your other members of the council are. But what those notes don't really address in detail is why you chose to serve on the council. So would anyone like to get started and share their thoughts on why they joined the council and give insights? I don't want to be like a teacher that picks on someone, but I'm prepared to be that way. Because go ahead, Lauren.
Thanks for the question. I actually love these questions and force other people to do them in my meetings as well. I think part of why I chose to be on the council, and also in general why I chose the job that I do, is because so much of what can be done needs to be done through relationship building. And so I think it's been just incredible to get to know the Franklin County community, the Missisquoi Bay community, and try to make sure that we are seeing the whole picture. There's so much value in voluntary projects. And so I think just being able to chase voluntary projects that people want to be doing to make improvements on their own land is really exciting to me.
Well, thank you. Anyone else want to go?
Lauren's a tough act to follow, but I'll do my best. I chose to serve on the council because it really, everything about this movement lines well with the MRBA's goals, and it just seems like a really great opportunity to be involved in our region and make sure that, as Lauren said, our community is collaborating and making sure that all parts of our watershed are being involved in improvement projects. So it just seemed like a really inclusive, local focused way to move money into the right places.
Thank you.
So I'll say why I'm glad to be on, coming from the select board of a town that's in the upper Missisquoi, really almost in the headwaters of the Missisquoi. I think it's important to have a seat at the table because I think it's a very worthwhile project in a big picture world. I also can't help but bring my background to the table as well, not just as a select board person, but as someone who farms in the upper Missisquoi and loves the river and the lake and everything in between. So I feel compelled to be part of this.
Thank you, Jake.
I can go next. As a chair of a board that has been involved in this clean water process for 19 years, the board felt this is just a natural evolution And then it's a responsibility of our organization to step forward and especially be involved in the beginning and the setting up and the organizing of how these funds are going to be administered around our basin. The goals for reduction are extremely high. The resources are very thin. If we broke this down into the amount of money provided to our basin against the pounds of phosphorus that we're supposed to be reducing, I think we trail the other 7 basins. Even though we may have the most money, we've got a big task ahead of us. So I feel a responsibility working on my own board. It's something that we've invited Dean and Dan to our annual meeting to describe this process. We had Neil Kamen there 2 years ago to describe this process. We worked with Catherine in 2019 when the bill was being passed and try to have an idea about how we're actually going to finally get to distributing these monies. So we just got that is the Friends. I'm representing an organization here. Is my background and is my motivation.
Thank you, Ken.
I can go.
Hi, Elaine. Thanks.
Hi. Yeah, so I'm really excited to be on this council. As Vermont Land Trust, as you may know, is a statewide organization, and I do work statewide. But a lot of my work as an ecologist who's really focusing on ecological restoration, which really almost probably 99% of the time we're talking about water quality restoration, wetland and stream work. A lot of it is in the Missisquoi Basin. I have a lot of ties myself. I used to live and teach actually at Missisquoi Valley Union High School before I took this career. So I have a real connection to the basin, even though I live actually in the Lamoille Basin myself. But I'm really excited to just be here because I really am excited about this kind of cross section of farmers. Jake, I was out on your land back in December, I think, and just fun to be able to work with many of you in a different in a group and be strategic and think about solving these problems from kind of with a diverse set of minds and approaches. So I'm really, selfishly, I just always love to learn. So I'm really excited to just get deeper into, the phosphorus crediting work and how we're going to actually address it with like nitty gritty actual physical projects and hear how those conversations happen. So I'm excited to be part of those and to learn from all of you.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
I'll go next.
Thank you.
Dean contacted me about an issue in Enosburg, and that piqued my interest, and I felt very ignorant. And now I've been diving in, and I thought that this it would be good connection for the Conservation Commission in a very holistic approach to the ecosystem. So that's why I'm involved, and always, spend a lot of time on rivers and lakes. So, and have known Kent's work for years. So that's how I got involved.
Thank you,
Okay.
Sarah.
This is Barry. I have been recently hired by the Planning Commission and am excited to work, as Alaire said, on this level, kind of identifying some on-the-ground projects that really make a difference. For the past 5 or 6 years, I've been with ECHO, Leahy Center for Lake Champlain, and worked on lake stewardship issues and been coordinator of the Vermont Clean Water Network. So it's exciting for me to work at this level, a little closer to the ground, and see how those state policies play out in real projects on the ground.
Thanks, Barry.
I'll go next. Well, this is part of my job, and I'm also going to be on the Basin Water Quality Council for Men from Agog, Basin 17. And so there's so many things in life that you feel as if there's nothing that you can do anything about. And I think this is one of those things where we actually might be able to do something about. We might be able to see some measurable changes through this process and through other processes that are going on within the state. And clean water is probably one of the most important things coming up in the future. There's that saying, water is the next oil or gold. You can look either of them up and you'll get articles on both. Clean water, sorry. Clean fresh water.
Right, you are. Thank you, Beth. Anyone else? Don't be shy.
I'll jump in. So my day job is working on the air side, mainly reducing carbon and energy and acid rain and all that kind of stuff. But about a year and a half ago, I was introduced to Kent, and he really opened my eyes to the critical nature of the water side and the issues going on there. And it's really a unique challenge to look at. And so that's why I'm happy to be part of this event.
Thanks, Tom. Anyone else? Or have we covered everybody? No, we haven't heard from Abraham.
Hi there, everyone. So I might be a little bit different. I wasn't given a whole lot of choice about this. My manager told me that I'd be acting as the alternate, and so here I am. I'm happy to be here, though, since I manage projects in the Memphremagog watershed. I think it's good to be sitting with a group of people with whom I won't have to recuse myself. There won't be a conflict of interest. And yet there's going to be a lot of cross-referencing going on. And so I'm looking forward to see, I think it's a good opportunity for me to see what comes out of this process and how it might be applied to the Memphremagog and vice versa. So I'm glad to be working at this level in a situation where I can kind of act as a cross-reference between a couple of different watersheds, aside from the value and which other people have identified of in the importance of soils and waters, especially in the coming years.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Emily?
I haven't gone yet, Dean. So my recent background has been in stormwater, which is heavily regulated. And so I'm running the stormwater utility for the town, but in being in St. Albans, we are so ag heavy. And prior to coming back to Vermont, I used to run a farm in California. And so I'm definitely invested in agriculture and improving agriculture in any way possible to help our waters. And so I think it'll be interesting. I mean, I'm also sitting in, not as an alternate, but involved in Basin 5 for the northern Lake Champlain portion. So any way that we can cross-reference and tap into resources and share ideas, I think will benefit all of our communities here and our different water needs. And Missisquoi definitely has a huge need.
Thanks, Emily. Peter, not to put you on the spot, and you are not a rep or an alternate, but you do work with a watershed organization. Do you have any thoughts? No,
I just like to say that this is quite a process. Having been involved with water quality issues on Lake Carmi for the last decade, last 15 years, to see this group formed and to see this process materialize, I think is a really good thing. I think it's going to benefit the basin immensely. The opportunity and the potential here is terrific. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the council work and to see these funds get out into the basin to make some meaningful changes, some real meaningful changes. And I thank you for letting me sit in and participate.
Well, thank you, Peter. Is there anybody else? I don't know that there is anyone else who would want to speak as a rep, alternate, or member of the public.
I was going to call on Luke, but I noticed you posted something in the chat where you notes that as an observer, it's heartening to hear how varied and genuine the motivations of those serving on the council are.
That's great. Thank you, Luke. Well, if it seems like it's time, then the next topic that is on the roundtable discussion list has to do with the timing for the election of a chair and vice chair. So does anyone have any thoughts about that or opinions, what have you?
I tend to agree with the idea that your staff came up with to let us get to know a little bit more about this work and some of the time requirements. The open meeting rules that Catherine described, even though I've been participating in them for decades, and that was a really good review, and to get our heads wrapped around that process a little bit. I thought it was a pretty good suggestion to let us think about this a little bit before deciding to take on a responsibility like this. I'd like to know more about it.
Thanks, Ken. Anyone else?
I agree with Kent. Some more time would be great. And like a clear description of what is involved would be helpful.
Thanks, Lauren.
I think for the basic overview of what's expected of the chair and vice chair, and certainly we could add more detail to this for a future discussion, but the rule for the Basin Water Quality Councils says that the chair is responsible to work with the clean water service provider to set the agenda for the meetings. And so there would be a consultation with the chair as the agenda is set for each meeting. And then it would be to facilitate the meetings and make sure everything is kept to the agenda and kept on track. And then the vice chair's job would be to serve in the chair's stead should the chair be unavailable. So our goal would be to make the job of the chair as easy as possible by doing a lot of the background work. It's not like a volunteer board where you as chair would be responsible for developing the agenda and maybe printing it out and sending it out, depending upon how your volunteer board works. You will have staff through the Clean Water Service Provider to support your role as chair. So hopefully it shouldn't be too time consuming outside of the meeting process itself.
That's good to know. And also I was wondering if Dean will also be present in the Basin Water Quality meetings.
Yes.
Okay, and what about personnel from DEC? They're the numbers people. The basin managers, they would be the ones who, well, wouldn't they be the ones that would be doing the number crunching for the projects and the phosphorus reductions? Or
yeah, that would be a cooperative effort between the Clean Water Service Provider staff and DEC.
Okay. So it wouldn't be up to us to do the calculations for the phosphorus reductions. Okay, just checking.
And the DEC folks were aware of this meeting, did trade a couple of emails. I think they felt like they could be here, but unless we felt that they had to be at this very first meeting, they wouldn't be, because I think they want to let the group get up on its feet on its own, but they will be involved in the future, as Catherine said.
On that topic, is there going to be any effort by DEC to connect different water quality councils, any kind of shared learning opportunities, training?
So the training question first, and we can talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but yes, there are DEC trainings that they have in the works. We haven't got a complete list or anything like that, but they do see the benefit of offering training that would be available to all of the councils, so there would be consistency across the basins. And then also people like me in the various basins also have semi-regular meetings, and there's a lot of information sharing. But for the council members, yes, there will be training offered by DEC that they see that would be available to all. And because he has joined, I just do want to mention that Dan Seeley from Richford has entered the meeting.
Welcome, Dan.
Get some light on here.
And not to put him on the spot, but just wanted to make sure that people knew that he is a council representative from the town of Richford, one of the 2 municipal reps. And so, Dan, just to catch you up, we are in the roundtable phase of the meeting and sharing ideas.
And so in terms of the chair, vice chair, what do people think about putting that on the agenda for the next meeting? I see Lindsay nodding her head, yes. And Alaire as well, and Kent. Okay, so it seems like people are going to be comfortable if we put that on the agenda for the next meeting. Thumbs up from Laura. Great, so we will do that. And in the meantime, if you have interest in serving as chair or questions about what it would mean to be chair or vice chair, then certainly get in touch with Dean. And he can talk you through it.
I have a question. Is the chair, does it have a term? Like a
1 year
term, or I guess
yeah,
1 year.
All right, so we will go ahead and put that on the agenda for the next meeting. Great. And then Barry, your question was well timed because we are going to talk about training, but first we're going to just hear from Dean a quick overview of the required documents that the Basin Water Quality Council is going to be required to review and help the clean water service provider adopt over the next couple of meetings.
Thanks, Catherine. Yes, as mentioned, the council will have to have a set of bylaws or bylaws and rules of procedure that guide it. As I mentioned earlier, I do have a draft. I wasn't expecting to do anything more than to just reiterate the point that there needs to be a document like that adopted by the council, and that we have prepared a draft for the group to consider. I will distribute that to everyone shortly after this meeting, but it has the sort of traditional bylaw and rules of procedure related material. If you've seen, I'm not just saying that if you've seen one set of bylaws, you've seen them all, but this is a pretty basic set of bylaws and rules of procedure. And that I would also expect would be something that the group would want to have some discussion of, at least at its next meeting. So bylaws, rules of procedure are one of the things that the group must have according to the rule. And as I mentioned earlier, another thing that the group must have is a policy regarding public participation. And that's something that you might not have had any experience with, whereas you've seen the set of bylaws before. But again, we've put something together that's very, very basic and with an eye towards it being an interim policy. And it could say something as simple as, it shall hereafter be our policy to ensure notice of meetings and decisions and actions, and to promote transparency and public participation when identifying projects, and giving consideration to people who may have limited English proficiency and disadvantaged groups and things like that, and to comply with the Department of Environmental Conservation's non-discrimination policy. It could be just something very, very basic, or even more basic than that. But we have put together a document for the group to look at, and that too could be on your agenda for your next meeting. It's probably less important to take up than the bylaws are, but this is something that we will also share. I'm happy to answer questions about what that might look like, but that is a requirement. And also it is something that is to be essentially adopted or signed on to by both the council and the QUISP. So it would be something that the council would take a vote on, and that Catherine, as the head of the Clean Water Service Provider, would also sign on to. Any questions about those two things? Last but not least, there's also a requirement that we have guidance to the partners who will be carrying out many of the projects. And so that's something else that will be presented. I'm putting it third just because I'm thinking that it's something that might not rise to the same level, although it is not something that we want to delay on. We've done work internally regarding procurement and what the process would be for getting the partners on board and pre-qualified. But that's just a third important area of work that the group would need to take up in the next meeting or possibly next 2 meetings. Any questions?
I have a question, Dean. Is there somebody who is designated to be a note taker?
We are recording meetings, and I, with some assistance from Dea, would probably be the ones who get the minutes. There isn't a plan to have a secretary identified along with the chair and vice chair. So no worries there if that was a concern, that one of you would have to be responsible for preparing minutes. That's not the case.
Thank you.
Okay. So if there are no questions about those things, the next item on the list for the roundtable was training. So what training topics do people here feel need to be addressed, and how would you like to do that?
I think probably guidance on project selection would be a good training. And I'm not sure if that's training or if that's just something that will happen organically.
I'm taking some notes here as you say that. Guidance on project selection and prioritization. Okay. Yeah, that's going to be a big part of the work that you do. And as many people have said in meetings I've been involved in for this, is that the plane is being designed as we're trying to fly it. Some of these things are going to take a little bit of working out, and how we do things at the beginning stages may not be necessarily how they're done in the later stages. But yeah, that's certainly a very important topic.
That's one of the reasons, Dean, that I brought up the DEC role in this. It doesn't serve anybody well if there's 15 different types of scoring systems potentially. So the more that we can learn from successful approaches and that have the blessing of DEC would be helpful.
And along those lines, I think one of the things that I get mixed up in meetings is the regulatory versus non-regulatory. I mean, when you actually think about it, it's pretty easy to tell the difference. But when you're going along with the flow of things, you think, oh, this would be a great project. Like, no, that's regulatory. So I think that's maybe, again, that's something that will happen organically. I'm not sure if we actually need training, but I know that that's been something that's confused me in the past.
Understood. So folks from organizations that are regularly involved in identifying and getting projects advanced, what training needs do you see?
Can you foresee a chance that the council could approve a project that did not meet with DEC's approval? So, and I think it goes back to questions that have been asked already about coordinating with DEC to be sure that we're all on the same page here. I know, like next week, Karen Bates is given a 45-minute, lunchtime discussion, which I think is going to be a really good review on how to get projects into the clean water portal. But I'm thinking that, that's like the starting point for these projects, and I'd hate to do anything that would contradict them.
Well, I will take a stab at addressing it and saying that from where I sit, there is no DEC veto power over the actions that the council takes. The QUISP, we as the folks who are supporting you in your work and you supporting us in ours, will make you aware of, okay, there's a project being discussed and it isn't eligible, but there are many different types of projects that will be eligible. And if it's eligible and the funding exists and you prioritize it as a council, there's no second guessing, there's no veto power. We will be reminding you of the importance of doing projects that will help meet the phosphorus reduction targets. But I guess, again, from where I sit, there's no DEC veto power over projects. So I'll just end with that.
I would imagine they would be interested in the percent phosphorus reductions, but isn't there some thing in the way it's written that you're allowed to have a certain percentage of projects that do not have a phosphorus reduction? It's like 15 or 20%.
And yes, as I was mentioning, I'm not remembering the precise percentage, but when I mentioned co-benefits earlier, that's the term that's used for project benefits that are not all about the phosphorus reduction. And so those co-benefits can be considered, and whether it's 15% or some other number, I'm unfortunately not remembering, but there will be projects, I'm sure, where if there was a need to make a choice between that project and another project, that all else being the same, all else being equal, a project with more co-benefits would be selected over one that doesn't have those co-benefits. The issue isn't going to be so much having to make choices with the amount of funding that's available, though. I think the issue is going to be, how can good projects, however we see that defined, be identified and scoped and made ready so that they can be done and start adding to the ledger as far as phosphorus reduction is concerned.
Yeah, these are great questions, and it seems like it really fits under that umbrella of needing training on how does an idea become something that's constructed, and what's the full process. And I'm remembering the Schoolhouse Rock of how a bill becomes a law. Something maybe not a sing along, but that idea of how do you get your idea where you're talking to a landowner perhaps all the way through the process to when trees are planted or some construction happens, and what does the project sponsor need to know, and what does the Basin Water Quality Council need to know?
Yeah, I think that's right, and I agree with everything that Lauren's been putting in the chat in terms of trainings for kind of what is the information that's needed, what's sort of the order of operations in getting that information. And then I'm really curious about, like I'm involved with a project now in a different basin where we've had different sources of funding to do design and development and figuring out how much phosphorus is in the sediment and what the benefit would be. And then now we have sort of a partial design, a really rough cost estimate. And then how do we go from that to actually getting funded? I am continuing to just really be curious about how the phosphorus crediting works. Like, is it that we say this is a certain number of pounds or tons of phosphorus, and then the project is going to cost this much, and then you just divide that to figure out what the cost is per pound? Or is there a set number that's like, for every pound of phosphorus, we as a council or we as a state decide it's worth this much, and so if you can bring that, then you can be assured of getting a certain amount of money. I can see benefits and drawbacks to both, but I think it's been unclear to me, and I think it has been to everyone else I've talked to about this as well. This is one big piece of that plane, I think, Dean, that's being built as we're flying it. But correct me if I'm wrong, I would love to be corrected. It's just something that I'm really wanting to understand, because kind of just feeling like in trying to get this other project, beyond this like conceptual design phase, putting a lot of just like very vague questions out there that it's hard to get answered. And then another piece is also about timing. If we've got a project, what's sort of the time frame in which we can bring it forward and be ready to do it? Because as we all know, there's a construction season and there's the winter. And so just like being ready to have things lined up to get the most work done that we can, and be efficient about the way that we use our time.
Thanks, Hilaire. That's great. Yeah. The DEC has a calculator for calculating what phosphorus, in theory, what phosphorus reductions would be for a given project. So they have a method, and it works with several different types of projects, but not every different types of project. But if there were some project ideas that came forward and we needed to have some general idea of what the phosphorus reduction amount would be, we would first turn to the calculator to give us some idea of what that amount is. If we knew what the budget would be, we could then look at the cost per pound of phosphorus reduction and get some idea whether or not it was in line with what DEC thinks those kinds of things should cost or not. And that's information that could be useful to the council, because if the council sees a project where the costs are really abnormal, either high or low, that could influence its decisions about whether or not to move that project forward. But I also see Lauren's questions or comments having to do with the process on how to apply. And that's really very important. And that has to do with the whole process of procuring. And these are things that haven't been fleshed out. Co-benefits, just to give everybody some idea, there was a UVM class that studied the whole topic of co-benefits, and they've released a report that addresses that and gives some ideas on calculating or assessing or including co-benefits. So if people are interested in that, let me know. And maintenance, that is a big part of this too, because all of these projects that we're endeavoring to get done, this framework says we also have to make sure that they continue to operate and they're maintained. And fortunately, there will be funding to help take care of that. But this is something that we haven't really done before, is to look at those long-term needs so that we can be sure that some project that we build is still doing what it was designed to do. Other thoughts on training? Trying to keep an eye on both your faces in the boxes in the chat here.
I'm just curious, looking around at who's here and the level of experience and information that you have, I know is really high up there. I'm wondering if there's any benefit to hearing from Karen Bates, the Basin Water Quality person, about an overview of the recently adopted Basin Plan and just where the key areas are that were identified in that Basin Plan. Is that something that people would think would be helpful, or is that something you want to kind of just do on your own if we make sure you have a link to where the plan is?
I think that would be good with a focus on project identification.
Got it.
Yeah, this is
be great to.
I'm sorry. Is there go ahead. The question I have is there a process in place? Have you identified a process of how you're going to identify the projects, how you're going to evaluate and review them? I mean, don't you need some type of procedure established first before you start the evaluation process?
So if I can jump in, Peter, there are meetings that have been going on, not for terribly long, but that are looking at that topic. So people like Lauren and Kent and I and others who are in this realm had a meeting, when was it? It was just last week, today's Monday, where we are starting to get an understanding of how all the groups identify and advance projects, because knowing how groups do it already is something that will inform how it might be done in the future. It's just that we don't have a report that we can go to that tells us how the groups have been doing it in the past. So we are getting that information together. And I'm not sure when our next meeting is, but we are trying to develop an understanding of how the different organizations identify and refine and advance projects, because we do think that that's going to be important. We're not looking to reinvent the wheel. We want to try to set up procedures that people can use that identify legitimate projects quickly and get them rolling. But we don't have a proposal for the group, but at some point the council may want to discuss, how all of the partners should do it and whether or not they all have to do it in the same way. But there will need to be a process for people, as Lauren said, people to apply for the funding to get a project underway. My thought has been that the councils will be prioritizing a few different things, including projects that are require a lot of engineering design and that will cost a fair amount of money. That's one type of project that the group would prioritize. But then I think that the group will also be prioritizing things that are in very early stages, and you want to make sure that they get the funding they need for us to all determine whether or not they're really going to result in a project.
So there is a kind of a subcommittee of the council that's looking at this process and looking at possible projects?
No subcommittee, because the council's just created today. But as the clean water service provider, I've been meeting with, or been part of meetings with these other organizations that have been developing projects, and we are starting to understand how they advance those projects. And like I said, what kind of procedure the council wants to spell out that all of the partners use, that hasn't happened yet, but will happen.
And additionally, there's work across the clean water service providers, across the basins with DEC on some of the common features like prioritization and processes that will be common across all basins, regardless of whether you're in the Missisquoi, the Memorial, or the Upper Lake Champlain. So there's that work going on too that will inform our project selection and prioritization process.
And have you determined how this is going to be presented to the council?
What specifically, Pete?
Well, how these project ideas are going to be presented to the council. Is there a procedure in place for that?
Not yet.
Okay.
And the thing to keep in mind, Pete, is that the QUISP, the clean water service provider, isn't going to be, we might identify places where there could be projects, but it's really, we will be relying on the organizations that have historically have done projects to come to the council and to the QUISP with their ideas. So the clean water service provider is not the primary source of project ideas. The primary source of project ideas is going to be the organizations that have been doing projects these last many years, including groups like Franklin Watershed Committee.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we're approaching, oh, I see Lauren with a hand.
Sorry, I'm just wondering what happens if we don't meet our targets? Like, what happens?
That's a great question. So a couple of different things can happen. One is that we can, as a clean water service provider, explain to DEC why the targets weren't met and what circumstances led to that. And DEC can decide that those were reasonable. Or we could be kicked off as the clean water service provider and they could pick a new one. My sense is that we will know as we approach the 5-year mark, whether there's a concern about us meeting our targets. And so we'll be in regular communications with DEC about that issue.
And in addition to that, I think it's also, the phrase might be satisfactory progress towards meeting the targets. It's not a yes or no binary, meet it or don't meet it kind of thing. The standard, I believe, is something like that. So there's recognition that if the funding remains low and it's never going to be adequate to meet the target, then we can't be held to meeting the target.
Okay, yeah, it's just the targets are high, and this is hard work to get projects on the ground. So just thinking with both the council hat, excuse me, and the district hat on right now.
Yeah, absolutely, Lauren. The targets are high and there's a lot of work to do in this basin, so much more so than others. And I think in the first couple of years of work, it's going to be really illustrative to see what progress can be made.
Catherine, I don't know, there's a comment from Kent about our council members operating under NRPC's liability insurance.
Yes, the functions of the Clean Water Service Provider and the Basin Water Quality Council fall under our umbrella liability coverage.
Okay.
Good question, Ken. Good to get that out there.
Thank you all for those ideas on training needs, and that's something else I could imagine being an agenda item, at least for part of the meeting next time. The last topic that was included on the list for the roundtable is stipends. This is stipends are incorporated into this process. There are some of you who work for organizations that have agreements with DEC ultimately that help pay for your time. There are some of you who may not be in that position, and so there is the possibility of stipend, but I just wanted people to be aware of that. And if you are working for an organization that doesn't have one of those agreements, then talk to me. And if you are a municipal rep and that's not paying you to contribute your time to this, then I want to talk to you. At the moment, I believe it's clear that it applies to the representatives, the alternates. That's not formally part of the package. However, it does seem to me like it would be important to treat the alternates in a similar way. And if that's a position, this is where the councils could be establishing policy. If the council feels like it's important for the alternates to have stipends in the same way that the representatives have stipends, then that would be something that might help drive future decisions and funding. But do people have questions about stipends? It essentially works out to, I think it's assumed to be 2 hours per meeting, 4 meetings a year, and I believe at $50 an hour. Is that correct? Yeah.
That's how it's set in the startup grants. And then moving forward after we're out of the startup phase, there's some questions about how that will all work. But I think that in summary, Dean will be in touch with all of you individually to see where you fall on the range of how people are compensated to attend these meetings, and then work with each of you individually to figure out what that means.
And I see a question from Lauren about alternates. If you can't make the meeting, Lauren, then you should talk to Abe, because he is the alternate for the districts.
And your staff member or anybody who's interested can attend any meeting as a member of the public and participate and know about what's going on in the meetings.
Okay. Any other questions about stipends? So the last thing that we have to talk about is really just summarizing our discussion and talking about what the meeting schedule would be. And if people can give me just 1 second, something that I had on my computer screen has not come up yet or has gone away. But perhaps, Catherine, you can just make any summary comments that you would like to make while I'm doing that.
Sure. I just wanted to thank everybody for taking the time to participate in this first meeting of the Water Quality Council and for participating in all the future meetings and making that commitment. I think we're all really excited about having the opportunity to have local direction for what happens in clean water projects. And I think we have an amazing team here as part of the council. And I really see us being as successful as possible with all of the challenges that we have ahead of us. We have a lot of opportunities too with this great talented group of folks. So I think it's really great having all of you here. The rule requires the Basin Water Quality Council to meet quarterly. We anticipate needing to meet more frequently than that in the startup phase, just hoping to do monthly meetings for the next few months to get everything started and answer all of these great questions that all of you have as we're trying to answer them at the same time. And so Dean had sent out a poll to all of you to try to get a sense of when might be a good regular meeting time. And Dean, have you successfully found that?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful.
So I'm going to share that. I say I'm going to share it, but I'm trying. So hopefully people can see. We had a question about whether or not people prefer daytime or evenings. So there is a slight preference for daytime. And in terms of the morning, people prefer early mornings over late mornings. And if in the meetings, people would prefer a start at 6 p.m. rather than 7 p.m. So it does seem like daytime is workable. It is 1 out of 4 who responded is sort of indifferent, but it does seem like we can continue with the daytime meetings. In terms of the day of the week, it does get a little bit more challenging. Whoops, maybe it looks like somebody just responded, not sure. Wednesday seems to be popular with some, but not popular with others. And Thursdays, a little bit unpredictable. Fridays, not as popular. So I had hoped that there might be a little bit clearer pattern, but if we go with the understanding that for the first few months of the council's existence that there would be monthly meetings, I will send out a poll that will try to zero in on Wednesdays so that people can determine whether or not a specific Wednesday morning early could work for folks. That would be the plan, unless there's some alternative suggested. So stay tuned for that. If there are any other thoughts on scheduling, please let me know.
All right, so we'll look for a poll from you, Dean, for some specific dates for the next couple of meetings.
Yes.
Before we wrap up, are there any final comments or thoughts that anyone would like to offer?
Thank you all. Appreciate
Wonderful.
it very much.
Thank you all. I look forward to seeing you again at the next meeting. And don't hesitate to reach out in between if you have questions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jake.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Yes, thank you.